Okay, so let's talk about how we implement routing using the Angular framework. Right. So as I just like we did for React, we are working with implementing single-page applications, meaning one index page will be downloaded. There'll be some root div or some root element where all the content will be injected into dynamically. And usually this page will never be re-rendered. Right? Instead, we dynamically go fetch content, and using JavaScript, we dynamically add content to the DOM. So let's get started. Let's create a project where we can play around with some of these ideas. Let's see. Let's go into webdev and go into 2019 summer 1, and we're going to create a new Angular project here. We'll say ng new, and we'll call it webdev dash, and this will be a client application. Just like there was a React client application, this is going to be an Angular client application. So client Angular, and I'll add maybe my username. So that's going to not do that. What? Oh, it must be, maybe it's too long. No. New project names must start with a letter. It does. Doesn't it like dashes, maybe? No. How about webdev? Is that okay? All right. All right, so that's going to start downloading the template project, and it's going to compile and transpile everything and set everything up for the default template application. While that's going, we're going to create a couple of pages and then explore how we might be able to navigate between these pages, right? Perhaps navigating from login to profile, from login to register, from various pages to different pages, and I'd like to be able to oftentimes pass along some parameters, right, along from one page to the next, and either navigate either programmatically, right, or by actually clicking a URL and navigating to a page. Now, oftentimes we want to navigate from one page to the other only if certain things happen. For instance, I will navigate from login to the profile page only if indeed I am logged in. Right, so I'd like to maybe run some logic. If indeed this user is who they say they are, then we navigate programmatically to that page. So we'll explore some of these ideas. All right, so that's it's completed. Let's see if we can go in and navigate into that project, and we can do ng serve -- open. So that's going to kick off npm start, and we'll transpile all the TypeScript down to JavaScript, start the Node.js server, and start hosting that application, and open up on a browser pointing to localhost 4200. That's the default location of the application. Is it running? Oh, there it is. It came up. So there it is. So welcome to app, and let's open it up with our favorite IDE. So let's close this. Close project, and let's open the project, and it's under webdev. There it is. So let's open that up. All right, so again, we're going to spend most of our time under the source directory, under the app directory. So under the app directory, we have a couple of things. We have the this app.modules is it's a configuration file that allows us to load or import some system-wide, some framework-wide libraries such as the form modules yesterday that we didn't have it installed, right? We'll need to declare it here. Also, any new components that we create, we either do it manually and register them here, or if we use the ng generate component command, it'll create the components and add them here automatically, right? Also, if we have any web services that we want to treat as singletons, right? We're also going to need to declare them here, okay? So it's a configuration file for system-wide configuration. Also, we have a component. This is a top-level component. This is the equivalent in React of the app.js, right? This is the equivalent here in Angular, and it has a component file. It has an HTML file. It has a CSS file and a spec file. So this is the top-level component. And any new components will be created with its individual directories with its own individual 4 files, right? The component file, CSS, HTML, and spec file. So let's create our first component. We'll create maybe like a login, a register, profile page, right? And see how we can navigate from these various places. Yes? Okay. Let's see. Angular routing. So let's create a login component. We're going to use the ng generate command. Right? These commands all have abbreviations. So instead of ng generate component, you can abbreviate it as ng-g c and then the name of the component. Right? So let's do that. So from the command line, let's open up another window. We're in the right place, yeah. I'm going to go into my source directory, and in here I'm going to say ng generate component login. Okay. So that's going to generate the component under the right directory, under the app directory, and it's under its own login directory. There it is, and we have our four files per component, and right now, if I refresh the page for our application, it still looks the same. Nothing changed. But we can replace that content. We can replace that content, and there's the default contents. Right. This welcome here, welcome to app, is actually this welcome over here, welcome to, and we can change it. And it recompiles and re-edits, right, and re-renders. So we can just blow this away, right, and it renders blank, and we could start using our brand new component. There's the default component. These components, the templates, is some really dumb content, right, like login works, and the component is here, right. This is the actual component that we looked at yesterday, and notice the selector. See the selector? This is the actual HTML element that you would use to render this particular component, right? And the naming convention, the default naming convention, is that it appends app dash and then the name of the component that you gave it, right? That's the default, but you can change it. Yes. Yeah, it has its own naming convention. This is a very common naming convention in HTML. Just like in Java, you use camel casing. In SQL, you use underscores. In HTML, you use dashes. If you have multiple words, use dashes to separate the words. Okay. So if we want to render this, and what would it render? It would render whatever's in the HTML. Right. Yesterday we were playing around with the templates. Right. Yesterday we were playing around with a template. And we have the template right here. A better option is to point to the file that renders, as opposed to having the content embedded in here. Right? So if we look at it, this is what it would render. So let's do it. So let's grab that, copy. Let's go to the top level component and just bring in our brand new login component. And there it is. So login works. Right, so it's rendering that login content. Everybody okay? All right. All right, excellent. So let's keep going. Let me close that. Let me close that. Let's see. Also notice that if you visit the app modules, you'll notice that our login component has been added in there. See that? Right. We didn't have to do that. It registers for us into that app modules direct file. Yes. If you do it manually, you would have to do that yourself. All right. So let's create 3 components: the login, the profile, and the register, and see if we can navigate between them. Yes. I'm sorry? Which step? The app login? I just copied from the component. I copied here, right, and then I pasted it in the in here. Right, I made it an element. All right. Also, these are the IDE is aware of all these documents being related to one another. So if you command click, it navigates to the component definition. Right. So the IDE, all these IDEs are aware of how these files are related to one another, which is great. If I click on here, it navigates to the HTML, which is awesome. So let's create several components. I'm going to first create the login component. Maybe we'll do something like h1 login, and perhaps maybe an input field. Maybe this will be a username, maybe a BR, and then this will be password, another input field, and finally a button that does a login. Okay? All right, so if it renders, it'll look something like that. Pretty ugly. All right, so let's create a couple of these. Right, let's create a login, a registration, a profile. Let's from the command line we can generate a couple more. So login, register, and profile. So that generates all 3. And we can notice that all the directories are created for each one of the components, and we can edit each one, perhaps putting a little more relevant content. So for profile, we can do h1 profile. For register, we can just replace this with h1 register. Okay? All right, so we want to be able to navigate between all these. So let's see how we can do that. All right, so to navigate, we need to declare, very much like we did for React, we need to declare routes. Right? The way you did it in React is that you brought in specialized tags, specialized HTML components, right, called route, router, and link. Okay? In Angular, it's slightly different. Instead of doing it right inside of the HTML document, right, the configuration of the routes is done outside in a separate file. Right? So the way we're going to do that is that in a separate file called approuting.ts, right? The file could be called whatever. It doesn't matter what it's called, as long as you know what's inside. We're gonna declare the routing logic in there. Right? We're going to copy that in a separate file, and we'll put it at the top level. New TypeScript file. Okay. In here, we're going to copy this right. Oops. Copy that. Oh, copy and paste it in here. There we go. Okay. Now let's read through this. All right, so this imports a couple of modules. Imports the router module from router Angular, Angular router. It also imports the various components that you want to navigate between. I will navigate between the login, the register, and the profile component, right? So I'm going to load them all up. So there's my login component, there's my register component, and I'm going to import my profile component. All right, they're all imported. Once we import them, we can now, in an array of routes, we can say these are all my routes, and say that these URLs map to this component, this URL to this component, this URL to this component. Right? Very much like what we did in React, right? We had, route, right? And then we said, this path renders this component, this path renders this component. Same thing, but it's a different syntax. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do another one. We say path. If we say register, then so if it's /register, we're going to load the following components. The register component. There we go. And if we instead see path profile, we do a profile component. There it is. Okay? We then, once we've done that, once we've declared our array of routes, there's a router module, which it's the equivalent of the router in React, that just says, okay, grab this array and boom, declare all these routes. Kick off the routing mechanism. Right? Start listening to changes in the URL, and if you see these routes, render the following components. Yes? All right. Okay, excellent. So the next step, once that is declared, we need to register these routes, these routings that we just declared, and declare them in our app modules. Right? Remember, app modules is where we configure everything. Right, it's our configuration. Actually, we could have done everything here, right? But usually we split it off into a separate file, since the routes could be fairly complex, right? Especially if you have a very complex application, lots of navigation. So we're going to import that. We're going to import it. Notice that we're exporting routing, so that means that we can import this right here from our app modules. So from our app modules, we're going to import. Notice our components have been all declared for free in here. We're going to import our routing from the directory, from the file we just created. There it is, app routing that we just created. And we're going to import it. We're going to say import our routing, comma. Okay. Here's where we can load all sorts of modules. The form modules will be also loaded here as well, and we're loading the browser. The routing module is also being loaded here, all ready configured. All right. Okay. What else? Finally, we need to start linking things together, like creating actual hyperlinks, right? And now, but when you click on these hyperlinks, they're not going to be handled by the browser. Instead, they're going to be handled by JavaScript, right? Now we have the routing mechanism listening for changes in the URL, right? It's going to intercept these changes in the URL. It's not going to actually navigate anywhere, right? Instead, it's going to render this content or render that other component depending on which one you click. So to do that, we use a normal hyperlink. We use a normal hyperlink, right? Let's go back to the root here. So I'm going to remove login. I'm just going to say that this is my whiteboard student app. Okay, so that's over here, whiteboard student app. And in here, I'm going to put the hyperlink. Router outlet. Am I missing something? No. Anyway, so the content here is that this hyperlink here, this hyperlink. Notice that it looks like a very much like any other hyperlink. Right? The only difference here is that instead of href, right, it has its own custom attribute. Right? It says that it's router link. If it were href, it would actually try to navigate somewhere, right? And we don't want to do that. Right? Instead, it's saying that this hyperlink is going to notify the router mechanism, right? And it's going to change the URL, right? But that maps to some component, right? The login component. If this were the profile link, it would map to the profile component. And then you can configure where do you want to render dynamically this component. Where do you want to render it? Where should it be injected? Right? And to do that, we have a separate element called the router outlet of where we can specify where things should be injected, where the content should go. Right? In React, that is done by the route. Right? The route does two things. Right? It declares the path and also the component to be rendered. Here it's kind of split into two. Right? Here it only declares the path, the link, right? But then you have to say where do you want to render it. Right? So it's slightly different. So let's see. If we click on login, indeed it renders the login right underneath into that place that we said that we want to render. And then you can create all the various links in here. Copy. I'm pasting here and declaring register, profile, right? This is register, this is profile, and maybe put some something in between to separate them. So you have login, register, and profile, all being rendered in that same router outlet, right, where it's being injected. And you can now click on either one of these, right, and see that the content is being updated, right, for in that particular placeholder. Make sense? Right. Now here the navigation is being done in a subset, of an existing larger page, but nothing stops us from replacing the entire page, right? It could be that the hyperlinks, you have hyperlinks here, and it looks like as if you're updating the replacing the entire page. So a component could be a subcomponent, right, of a small piece of some page, or it could be an entire page. It's up to you what the granularity of your component is. Yes? It could be one big component that contains many small components, each one with its own navigation, right? Or one big one with one big navigation that then checks, that renders all the various subcomponents. Everybody good? You're still with me? All right, excellent. So we did register, we did the profile, we did the router links, the profile. We didn't have forms, right? So we're going to start adding forms to our components so that you can actually type your username and password at the login or the register or the profile, right? And depending on whether it's the correct username, the correct password, then we're actually going to navigate or not, right? We want to have some logic around that. So to do that, we're going to have to bring in the forms modules so that we can start interacting and navigating and whatnot. So let's do that next.